The crystal chandeliers of the Moretti estate didn't just illuminate the ballroom. They acted as 1,000 jagged teeth, reflecting the cold, predatory light of the men who gathered beneath them. This was the summit of the five families, a night where peace was brokered with the same sharpness as a blade to the throat. Dante Moretti stood at the apex of the grand staircase, his tailored charcoal suit fitting his frame like a suit of modern armor. His eyes, the color of a winter sea just before a storm, swept over the crowd with a calculated indifference. To Dante, the world was divided into two categories: assets and liabilities. There was no room for the soft, the slow, or the imperfect in his empire. He adjusted his silk tie, his knuckles scarred from a life of enforcing his will, and began his descent into the lion's den. Elena Rossi moved through the periphery of the gala like a ghost in a black apron. As part of the elite catering staff, her job was to be part of the furniture, a silent provider of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. She felt the weight of the silver tray in her hands, a familiar pressure that anchored her to the present. To the guests, she was just a curvy girl, perhaps a bit too soft-featured and unassuming to belong in such a high-octane environment. Her uniform was slightly tight around her hips, and her cheeks held a youthful roundness that invited dismissal. She was the invisible girl, the one people looked past rather than at. It was exactly how she wanted it. For 3 years, Elena had cultivated this mask of domesticity, burying the woman who had once been known in the darkest corners of the intelligence world as the ghost. The collision happened near the mahogany bar. A hurried guest nudged Elena's shoulder, causing her to stumble slightly. She corrected her balance with a grace that went unnoticed by everyone except the man she nearly bumped into. Dante Moretti looked down at her, his lip curling in a sneer of pure, unadulterated disdain. He didn't see the way her feet had shifted into a perfect defensive stance, or how her eyes had instantly mapped the nearest exits. He only saw a clumsy, plump waitress who had dared to occupy his personal space. "Watch where you're going," Dante said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that made the surrounding guests freeze. He let his gaze rake over her, lingering on her soft curves with a look of clinical disgust. "Someone as soft and undisciplined as you has no place in a world of steel, girl. You're a walking liability. If you can't even handle a tray, how do you expect to survive in a room full of sharks? Get out of my sight before your incompetence becomes my problem." Elena didn't flinch. She didn't blush or stammer an apology. She simply lowered her head, her dark hair falling forward to hide the flash of icy recognition in her eyes. "My apologies, Signor Moretti," she murmured, her voice steady and devoid of the fear he expected. She stepped back, melting into the shadows of a velvet curtain, but her heart was beginning to race for a different reason. As Dante turned his back on her, dismissing her existence as one would a nuisance insect, Elena's tactical training kicked in. She hadn't been looking at Dante's face. She had been looking at the room through his perspective, and in the reflection of a polished silver ice bucket, she saw him. A waiter was standing by the west entrance, near the heavy drapes that led to the kitchens. He was holding a tray of crystal flutes, but his posture was wrong. He stood with his weight distributed on the balls of his feet, his shoulders squared like a soldier on a firing line. More importantly, tucked behind his ear was a small, flesh-colored device, a non-regulation tactical earpiece, the kind used by high-end paramilitary contractors, not catering staff. Elena's gaze shifted to the balcony. 2 more men in black suits were moving with a synchronized rhythm that Dante's own security team hadn't picked up on. They were too busy watching the front doors, too focused on the obvious threats to notice the wolves already inside the fold. Dante was now standing in the center of the room, raising a glass of vintage wine to begin the toast that would solidify his dominance over the families. He looked powerful, untouchable, the sun around which the underworld revolved. He had no idea that the soft girl he had just humiliated was the only person in the room who knew he was seconds away from an execution. Elena's mind worked with the speed of a high-velocity processor. She counted the shooters, 1 by the door, 2 on the balcony, and likely a 4th near the fuse box. The air in the room seemed to thicken, the music of the string quartet sounding like a funeral dirge in her ears. She looked at Dante, who was laughing coldly at a joke made by a rival boss. He was arrogant, cruel, and had treated her like dirt beneath his expensive shoes. Part of her wanted to let the hammer fall, to see if his world of steel could protect him from a lead bullet. But the professional in her, the extractor who had saved senators and generals from certain death, couldn't let it happen. She saw the waiter by the door reach into his jacket, his hand closing around a silenced subcompact. The men on the balcony were unbuttoning their blazers, their eyes locked on the back of Dante's head. Elena dropped her tray. The sound of silver hitting the marble floor rang out like a gunshot, momentarily drawing the attention of the nearest guards. Dante spun around, his face reddening with fury as he saw the clumsy girl again. "I told you to," he began, his voice rising in anger. But Elena wasn't looking at him with submission anymore. Her eyes were sharp, lethal, and focused. In one fluid motion, she lunged forward, not away from him, but directly at him. Dante reached for his waistband, his instincts telling him he was under attack, but he was too slow. Elena's hand shot out, her fingers wrapping around his lapel with the strength of a vice. "Down," she hissed, her voice no longer a whisper but a command that carried the weight of a battlefield. Before Dante could process the change in her demeanor, the lights in the ballroom flickered and died, plunging the room into a terrifying, suffocating darkness. In the split second before the screaming started, the first muzzle flash ignited the shadows from the balcony, the bullet whistling through the air exactly where Dante's chest had been a heartbeat before. He felt the rush of wind as he was tackled to the floor, the soft body of the waitress pinning him down as the world around them erupted into a chaotic symphony of breaking glass and dying men. The hunt had begun, and the girl he despised was the only thing keeping his heart beating. The darkness was not absolute. It was a jagged, flickering thing, illuminated by the rhythmic staccato of muzzle flashes from the upper tiers. Dante felt the cold marble against his cheek and the heavy, solid weight of Elena pressing him into the floor. His lungs burned, the air knocked out of him by her tactical tackle. For a second, his mind refused to accept the reality of the situation. He was Dante Moretti. He was the sun around which the underworld revolved. People didn't tackle him, they bowed to him. He tried to shove her off, his hand catching the rough fabric of her catering vest. "Get off me, you stupid girl. My guards will." A spray of stone chips from a nearby pillar stung his face as a high-caliber round pulverized the masonry. Elena didn't flinch. She shifted her weight, pinning him more effectively, her hand reaching back to grab a heavy, circular silver serving tray that had fallen beside them. "Your guards are dead or dying, Moretti," she snapped, her voice stripped of its previous stuttering timidity. It was a blade of ice cutting through the roar of the gunfire. "Now shut up and move when I tell you, or I'll leave you here to be served as the main course." Dante gasped, the sheer audacity of her tone shocking him into a stunned silence. He looked past her shoulder and saw his lead security detail, a man trained by Spetsnaz, collapsing with a neat hole through his forehead. The assassins weren't just thugs. They were professionals using thermal optics. They were picking off anyone in a suit. Elena, in her drab, shapeless uniform, was a shadow among shadows. She wasn't just hiding. She was calculating. The gunmen on the balcony shifted their fire, sweeping the floor in a systematic kill zone pattern. Elena saw the sweep coming. She grabbed Dante by the collar of his $1,000 tuxedo, dragging him behind a fallen mahogany banquet table. The wood groaned under the hail of lead. "Stay low," she commanded. She didn't wait for his response. She reached into her waistband, and for a fleeting second, Dante expected her to pull out a pistol. Instead, she gripped the silver tray like a buckler. A hitman in a tactical mask vaulted over the railing of the mezzanine, landing 10 feet away with a suppressed submachine gun raised. He caught Dante's movement and pivoted, his finger tightening on the trigger. In that heartbeat, the world slowed for Dante. He saw death coming, a black void at the end of a barrel. But Elena was faster. She didn't cower. She exploded upward from her crouch, a blur of hidden muscle and focused intent. As the hitman fired, she angled the heavy silver tray with the precision of a geometer. The bullet struck the polished surface with a deafening ping. The trajectory deflected harmlessly into the ceiling. Before the shooter could adjust, Elena closed the distance. She didn't use the tray as a shield anymore. She used it as a weapon. She swung the edge of the silver disc with a horizontal force that would have shattered a tree limb. It caught the assassin under the jaw, the sound of breaking bone echoing through the screams of the gala guests. As he stumbled, she stepped into his guard, her elbow connecting with his solar plexus, followed by a palm strike to his nose that sent shards of bone into his brain. He was dead before he hit the floor. Dante watched, his mouth dry, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The curvy, clumsy girl he had mocked only minutes ago moved with a lethal, terrifying grace. She didn't look soft now. She looked like a goddess of war forged in the very steel he claimed to rule. She snatched the fallen submachine gun from the dead man's grip, checked the chamber with a practiced flick of her wrist, and turned back to Dante. Her eyes, usually downcast and shy, were now glowing with a predatory intensity that made his blood run cold. "The kitchen exit is compromised," she said, her voice low and rapid, ignoring the blood splatter on her cheek. "They're funneling the survivors toward the main lobby to finish them off. We're going through the service elevator, but we have to cross 20 feet of open floor." Dante scrambled to his feet, his pride finally beginning to merge with a desperate need for survival. "I have a weapon," he hissed, reaching for the Beretta tucked into his back holster. He pulled it out, but his hands were shaking. Not from fear, he told himself, but from the adrenaline. He went to rack the slide, and it jammed. The high-end, custom-engraved firearm, his symbol of power, was useless. He cursed, his face heating up with a mix of rage and humiliation. Elena didn't laugh. She didn't even look surprised. She just reached out, took the pistol from his hand, cleared the jam in less than a second with a brutal yank, and handed it back. "Don't aim for the chest," she whispered, her face inches from his. "They're wearing level 3 plates. Go for the pelvis or the throat. Can you do that? Or do I need to carry you like a sack of flour?" Dante's jaw tightened. The insult stung worse than the bullets, but the way she looked at him, with a total lack of the fear or adoration he was used to, ignited something primal in him. "Just lead the way, waitress," he growled. Elena nodded, a grim ghost of a smile touching her lips. "On 3. 1, 2, on 3. She didn't just run. She created a diversion. She grabbed a bottle of high-proof cognac from a nearby cart, smashed it against a decorative candle stand, and kicked the growing flame into a pile of silk drapes. The fire roared upward, creating a wall of heat and smoke that blinded the thermal sensors of the men on the balcony. "Move," she yelled. They bolted across the marble expanse, the air thick with the smell of expensive perfume, spilled wine, and cordite. Bullets chased their heels, chewing up the floorboards. Elena fired back over her shoulder, not aiming to kill but to suppress, her shots rhythmic and controlled. She was shielding him with her own body, placing herself between Dante and the source of the fire. They reached the service corridor just as a second team of assassins rounded the corner. These men were different, larger, wearing heavy tactical gear. Elena didn't hesitate. She threw the empty silver tray with a spinning force that distracted the lead man for a fraction of a second. Then she dived into a roll, coming up with her weapon barking. Dante joined in, his Beretta finally finding its mark as he followed her lead, aiming low. The corridor turned into a slaughterhouse of narrow angles and ricochets. Elena moved through the carnage like she was born for it, her movements a brutal dance of efficiency. She used her physical weight to slam attackers into walls, her strength surprising them, her low center of gravity making her an immovable force in close quarters. They reached the heavy steel doors of the service elevator. Elena punched the button, her eyes darting to the security cameras overhead. She saw them swivel to follow her. A cold realization dawned on her. This wasn't just a hit, it was an inside job. The security system was being operated by someone who knew exactly where they were. The elevator chimed, the doors sliding open to reveal a cramped, dimly lit space. She shoved Dante inside and followed, her breath coming in ragged gasps now. As the doors began to close, a figure appeared at the end of the hallway. Dante's consigliere, his most trusted advisor, standing calmly among the bodies of the fallen guards. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't running. He was holding a radio, his eyes locked onto Dante's with a look of cold, clinical detachment. Dante reached out, trying to stop the doors, his face a mask of disbelief. "Silas? What are you?" Elena grabbed Dante's arm and yanked him back into the corner of the elevator, out of the line of sight. The doors hissed shut, cutting off the image of the betrayal. The elevator began its slow, grinding descent. Dante slumped against the metal wall, his breath hitching. "He was my brother," he whispered, the reality of the coup finally shattering his composure. Elena stood over him, the submachine gun resting against her thigh, her curvy frame silhouetted against the flickering elevator light. She looked down at him, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something like pity in her eyes, though it was quickly replaced by the hardness of a soldier. "In this world, Dante, brothers are just enemies who know where you sleep," she said. She reached up and tore the white lace collar from her uniform, revealing a tactical throat mic she had hidden beneath it. She clicked it on, but there was only static. They were being jammed. The elevator jolted, a mechanical groan echoing through the shaft. It wasn't stopping at the basement. It was stopping at the garage, where she knew a kill team would be waiting. She looked at Dante, then at the emergency hatch in the ceiling. "We're not going to the garage," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "We're going into the guts of the building. And you're going to tell me exactly why your own people want you dead, or I might just decide to stop being your guardian angel." The elevator groaned, a metallic shriek echoing through the narrow shaft as Elena slammed her fist into the emergency stop button. The sudden deceleration threw Dante against the back wall, his breath leaving him in a ragged gasp. Above them, the cable hummed with a tension that felt like a living thing, ready to snap. Dante looked up, his eyes bloodshot, searching Elena's face for something, anything, that made sense. The woman he had mocked just hours ago for being too soft and unfit for the world of steel was now standing over him, her stance wide and balanced, her hand steady as she checked the magazine of the submachine gun she had liberated from a dead assassin. "Silas," Dante choked out, the name of his consigliere tasting like ash in his mouth. "He was with me since the beginning. He was the one who suggested the gala. He said it was time for peace." Elena didn't look at him. She was busy prying open the service hatch in the ceiling with a folding knife she'd pulled from a hidden sheath in her boot. "Peace is the lie men like you tell yourselves when you want to stop looking over your shoulder," she said, her voice like cold flint. "Your brother didn't just suggest this gala, Dante. He choreographed it. Every guard who fell in the first 30 seconds was positioned by him. Every exit that's currently locked was his order." She reached up, gripped the edges of the hatch, and hauled herself upward with a display of raw upper body strength that made Dante's jaw tighten. She didn't struggle with her weight. She used it, her movements fluid and practiced, a paradox of grace and power. She reached back down, offering him a hand. Dante stared at it. It was a soft-looking hand, the hand of a woman who handled fine china and silk linens, but the grip she offered was like a vice. "If you want to live to see the sunrise, you get up now," she commanded. "The garage is a kill box. Silas knows the elevator's override codes. He's probably already sending a team to the maintenance floor to meet us." Dante took her hand, and she pulled him up into the dark, cramped space above the elevator car. The air here was thick with the smell of grease and old dust. They were suspended in the guts of the Moretti Tower, surrounded by the humming nerves of his empire, wires, pipes, and steel beams. Elena pulled the hatch shut just as the elevator beneath them lurched. Someone was remotely controlling it, sending it down to the garage level where the executioners waited. "How did you know?" Dante whispered, his voice echoing in the darkness. He was inches away from her now, the scent of her perfume, something light and floral, mixing with the acrid stench of cordite. It was a jarring combination. Elena moved through the shadows with the confidence of a predator. She was pulling a small, high-tech tablet from a pocket hidden in her voluminous skirt. "I saw the signal," she replied, her eyes illuminated by the blue glow of the screen. Before the lights went out, Silas adjusted his cufflink 3 times. It's a standard silent trigger for a localized EMP or a coordinated strike. And he didn't look surprised when the shooting started. He looked bored. She paused, her fingers flying across the screen as she hacked into the building's internal schematic. He didn't miss the sniper on the north balcony, Dante. He signaled him to hold fire until you were in the center of the room. He wanted the maximum amount of witnesses to see you fall. Dante leaned back against a cold steel beam, the weight of the betrayal finally sinking in. His empire, built on loyalty and blood, was crumbling from the inside. "I trusted him with my life," he muttered. Elena turned to him, the blue light of the tablet casting sharp shadows across her face. "That was your first mistake. Your second was thinking that someone's value is determined by how well they fit into your narrow idea of a soldier." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous, intimate whisper that sent a shiver down his spine. "You called me soft earlier, Dante. You told your man I had no place in a world of steel. But look at you now, the great Mafia boss, shivering in a dark hole while the catering girl holds the only gun in the room." The humiliation was sharp, but beneath it, Dante felt a surge of something else, an intense, magnetic pull toward this woman who was a complete mystery. She wasn't just a survivor, she was a strategist. She was the most dangerous person he had ever met, and she was the only reason his heart was still beating. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice low and intense. Elena didn't answer. Instead, she pointed toward a narrow ventilation duct. "We move. Now, if Silas is as smart as you say, he's already realized we're not in that elevator car." As if on cue, the sound of heavy boots echoed from the floor above them. Muffled voices shouted orders. The hunt had begun. Elena led the way into the duct, her movements surprisingly quiet despite the cramped space. Dante followed, his mind racing. He had spent years looking for the perfect weapon, the perfect soldier, the perfect wife, all while looking for someone who fit a specific, polished mold. He had looked right past Elena, dismissing her because she didn't look like a killer. They crawled for what felt like hours, the heat in the ducts becoming stifling. Elena stopped suddenly, pressing a finger to her lips. She leaned her ear against the metal plating. Below them, through a small grate, they could see into a secondary security hub. Silas was there, standing over a bank of monitors, his face illuminated by the flickering screens. He was talking into a phone, his voice calm and terrifyingly cold. "I don't care how many men it takes," Silas said. "Dante doesn't leave this building. And the girl, kill her slowly. I want to know who she is before she dies. No one hides that kind of training under a waitress uniform by accident." Dante reached for the gun at Elena's side, his knuckles white with rage, but she caught his wrist. Her grip was cold, a silent warning. She leaned into his ear, her breath warm against his skin, a stark contrast to the icy words she whispered. "He's not alone. Look." Behind Silas, 3 men moved into the frame, men Dante didn't recognize. They weren't Moretti soldiers. They wore the insignia of the Valenti family, his fiercest rivals. The betrayal went deeper than a coup. Silas had sold the entire Moretti legacy to their enemies. Dante felt a surge of nausea. Everything he had built was being dismantled by the man he called a brother. Elena watched him, her eyes unreadable. She knew the pain of betrayal. He could see it in the way she held herself, like a wound that had never quite healed. "We can't stay here," she whispered. "The Valenti hitmen are professionals. They'll start thermal scanning the vents in minutes." She looked at the tablet again, then at the grate. "There's an old service tunnel that leads to the underground subway line. It was sealed off in the 80s, but it's still on the architectural maps." She looked back at Dante, her expression hardening. "It's a long drop, and it's going to be pitch black. Are you ready to get your hands dirty, boss?" Dante looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time, not as a curvy girl who didn't belong, but as his only hope for survival. "I'll do whatever you say," he admitted, the surrender tasting like iron. Elena nodded once, then kicked the grate open with a single, powerful strike. The metal clang echoed like a gunshot through the hall. "Go," she hissed. Dante dropped through the opening, landing hard on the concrete floor of the security hub sublevel. Elena followed a second later, landing with the silent precision of a cat. They were in a dark, damp corridor that smelled of stagnant water and electricity. Behind them, they heard the shouts of guards. They had been spotted. Elena grabbed Dante's hand and pulled him into the darkness. "Don't look back," she warned. "In the shadows, the only thing that matters is the next step." As they raced deeper into the bowels of the city, the sound of gunfire erupted behind them, the bullets sparking off the stone walls. They reached a heavy, rusted iron door, the entrance to the forgotten tunnel. Elena fumbled with the lock, her brow furrowed in concentration. Come on," she hissed. The footsteps were getting closer. A flashlight beam cut through the dark, sweeping over them. "There they are," a voice yelled. Dante turned, bracing himself for the end, but Elena finally wrenched the door open. She shoved him through and slammed it shut, sliding a heavy iron bar across the frame just as the first bullets thudded into the other side. They were in total darkness now. The only sound was their heavy breathing and the distant roar of a subway train. Elena reached into her belt and cracked a chemical glow stick. A sickly green light filled the tunnel, revealing a narrow, crumbling path. But as the light spread, Dante saw something that made his blood run cold. There, etched into the dust on the floor, were fresh footprints. And they were leading further into the tunnel, toward the only exit. Someone wasn't just chasing them. Someone was already waiting for them in the dark. Elena saw it too. She raised her weapon, her eyes narrowing as she stepped in front of Dante, shielding him with her own body. "Stay behind me," she commanded, her voice a low growl. "We're not alone." From the shadows ahead, a low, mocking laugh echoed through the tunnel, a sound Dante recognized all too well. It wasn't Silas. It was someone far worse. The mocking laughter echoed through the damp, narrow passage, bouncing off the weeping stone walls until it seemed to come from every direction at once. Dante gripped his jammed pistol, his knuckles white, but Elena didn't hesitate. She didn't even flinch. She reached into the small of her back, drawing a serrated combat knife that seemed to appear from thin air. "Close your eyes, Dante," she whispered, her voice like cold silk. Before he could protest, she kicked the chemical light stick toward the source of the sound. In the fleeting green glare, a silhouette emerged, a scout for the rival syndicate, his finger already tightening on the trigger of a submachine gun. Elena moved like a blur of redirected kinetic energy. She didn't run. She lunged, staying low to the ground, her body weaving through the line of fire. A single burst of gunfire shredded the air where she had been a millisecond before. Then, there was only the sound of a wet thud and a choked gasp. By the time Dante's eyes adjusted, the scout was on the floor, and Elena was standing over him, wiping her blade on her sleeve with a clinical detachment that chilled Dante to the bone. She didn't look at the body. She looked at the heavy steel door at the end of the corridor. "We're leaving. Now." 20 minutes of navigating through the labyrinthine sewer system finally brought them to a nondescript metal hatch that led into the basement of an abandoned textile warehouse on the edge of the industrial district. This was one of Elena's prepared bolt holes, a place that didn't exist on any map Dante's intelligence team had ever scouted. As the heavy hatch clanged shut and Elena engaged the triple deadbolt system, the adrenaline that had been keeping Dante upright began to ebb, replaced by a searing confusion and a bruised ego. The warehouse was freezing, the air thick with the scent of dry rot and old oil. Elena walked over to a workbench, flicking on a single, flickering overhead bulb that cast long, jagged shadows across the room. She began to strip off her torn, blood-stained catering vest, her movements stiff. "You're going to start talking," Dante said, his voice regaining some of its usual gravelly authority, though it wavered with exhaustion. He stood in the center of the room, looking wildly out of place in his ruined three-piece suit. You're not a waitress. You're not just some girl from a catering service. I saw how you moved back there. I saw how you killed that man. Who the hell are you, Elena Rossi? Elena didn't answer immediately. She sat on a wooden crate and pulled her white dress shirt over her head, leaving her in a tactical black sports bra. Dante's breath hitched, but not for the reasons he would have expected an hour ago. In the harsh, unforgiving light of the bulb, the woman he had dismissed as soft and unfit was revealed. Her skin wasn't just a canvas of curves. It was a roadmap of a violent, secret history. Across her ribs was a jagged, silver scar from a high-velocity round. On her shoulder, the puckered skin of a deep shrapnel wound. And then there were the tattoos, not the decorative ink of a civilian, but the grim, functional symbols of a shadow operative. On her left forearm was a stylized raven perched atop a pile of skulls, the insignia of the Black Wing Extraction Unit, a Black Ops group so secretive most governments denied its existence. I was a ghost, Dante, she said, her voice devoid of emotion as she picked up a bottle of antiseptic. Before I decided I wanted to be invisible for a different reason, I was the person people like you called when the world was ending and there was no one else to turn to. She poured the liquid over a graze on her thigh, her jaw tightening but no sound escaping her lips. Dante walked closer, his eyes fixed on the scars. He felt a sudden, sharp pang of shame. He remembered the way he had looked at her at the gala, the sneer he hadn't bothered to hide, the derogatory comments he'd made to his men about her weight and her lack of refinement. He had judged her by the standards of his shallow, gilded world, never realizing that every extra pound she carried was functional muscle and endurance built for survival, and every curve was a shield for a heart that had endured more than his ever would. He realized now that her clumsiness at the party hadn't been lack of grace. It had been the calculated movement of someone constantly scanning for exits and threats. The ghost, Dante whispered, the name clicking into place in his mind. The legendary extractor who vanished after the fall of Tripoli. They said you died in the explosion at the embassy. I wanted them to say that, Elena replied, finally looking up at him. Her eyes were no longer the shy, submissive eyes of a servant. They were the eyes of a predator. I was tired of the blood, Dante. I wanted a life where the only thing I had to worry about was whether the champagne was chilled or the hors d'oeuvres were straight. But men like you never make it easy to stay retired. Dante reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and touched the edge of the scar on her shoulder. To his surprise, she didn't flinch away. The skin was warm, vibrant, and alive. For the first time in his life, Dante Moretti felt small. He was a king in his world, a man of power and terror, but standing in this cold warehouse with this woman, he realized he was a child playing with matches while she was the fire itself. I insulted you, he murmured, the apology tasting like ash in his mouth. I called you weak. I told my men you had no place in my world. Elena let out a short, dry laugh. Your world is a playground, Dante. You play at war with your suits and your codes of honor. My world is about staying alive when everyone you trust has a knife at your back. You were right about one thing, though. I don't belong in your world. I'm far too dangerous for it. She stood up, moving into his personal space. The height difference was there, but she seemed to tower over him in spirit. The air between them hummed with a new, electric tension. Dante found himself staring at her lips, then back at her fierce, intelligent eyes. The curvy girl he had despised was gone, replaced by a goddess of war who had just saved his life twice. He felt a surge of attraction so intense it made his head spin, a mix of primal respect and undeniable lust. He wanted to say something, to bridge the gap between them, but Elena's expression suddenly shifted. Her eyes went cold, and she looked down at his wrist. Dante's expensive, custom-made watch was emitting a faint, rhythmic pulse of blue light from the side of the casing, a light that shouldn't have been there. Elena grabbed his arm, her grip like a vice. When did you get this watch serviced? She hissed. Last week, Dante stammered, confused. My consigliere, Silas, took it to the jeweler. What? Elena didn't answer. She took a heavy pair of pliers from the workbench and, with a single, violent motion, crushed the face of the $1 million timepiece. As the glass shattered, a tiny, microscopic chip fell onto the wooden table. It was glowing bright red, blinking rapidly. "It's not just a tracker," Elena whispered, her face pale. "It's a proximity beacon. They don't need to find us anymore." As if on cue, the silence of the warehouse was shattered by the rhythmic thumping of rotor blades overhead. A spotlight swept across the frosted glass of the upper windows, illuminating the room in a blinding, terrifying white light. A voice boomed through a megaphone, echoing against the metal walls. "Dante Moretti, Elena Rossi, we know you're inside. You have 60 seconds to come out with your hands up, or we level the building." Elena looked at Dante, a grim, determined smile playing on her lips. She reached under the workbench and pulled out a heavy tactical crate, kicking it open to reveal an arsenal of high-grade weaponry. "Well, Dante," she said, tossing him a loaded assault rifle. "It looks like you're finally going to see what my world really looks like. Try to keep up." Dante's fingers tightened around the cold, textured grip of the assault rifle. It felt familiar, yet in this context, it felt like a toy compared to the sheer, radiating authority Elena was projecting. The 60-second countdown was a hammer striking an anvil in his chest. Outside, the rhythmic thrum of the helicopter blades grew into a deafening roar that vibrated the very marrow of his bones. He looked at Elena, really looked at her, and realized he had been a blind fool. The curves he had mocked as softness were actually the result of a powerful, functional physique built for endurance and explosive force. Her movements weren't clumsy, they were efficient. She didn't waste an ounce of energy. 50 seconds, she said, her voice a low, steady hum that cut through the external noise. She didn't look at the windows where the white light was bleeding through the cracks. Instead, she was busy at a terminal bolted to the floor, her fingers flying across a keyboard. "Dante, listen to me very carefully. From this moment on, your title means nothing. Your money means nothing. I am the commanding officer, and you are my secondary. If I tell you to jump, you don't ask how high. You jump until your head hits the ceiling. Do you understand?" Dante felt a flare of his old ego rise up, the instinct to remind her who he was. But it died the moment he met her gaze. Her eyes weren't just the eyes of a survivor. They were the eyes of a predator who had seen the bottom of the world and climbed back up. "Understood," he rasped, his voice sounding small even to his own ears. "Good. Grab the bag by the door. It's got thermals and extra mags." She slammed a final key, and a section of the warehouse floor began to hiss. A hydraulic lift hidden beneath a stack of crates descending to reveal a dark, yawning maw. The 60 seconds was a courtesy they won't honor. They'll breach in 10. Right on cue, the roof skylights shattered in a rain of jagged glass. Black-clad figures began descending on fast ropes, their silhouettes framed by the blinding spotlight of the helicopter. Dante raised his rifle, his finger ghosting over the trigger, but Elena grabbed his shoulder and shoved him toward the descending lift. "Not yet. Let the gas do the work," she yelled. As the first mercenary hit the floor, Elena threw a small, silver sphere into the center of the room. It didn't explode with fire. It hissed, releasing a thick, violet-tinted vapor that filled the air instantly. The mercenaries began to cough violently, their high-tech respirators seemingly useless against whatever chemical cocktail Elena had brewed. She shoved Dante into the lift and jumped in after him, hitting a manual override. As they descended into the darkness, the last thing Dante saw was the ceiling of the warehouse erupting in a fireball as the mercenaries' own breaching charges ignited the volatile gas. The lift hit the bottom with a jarring thud. They were in a narrow, concrete corridor that smelled of salt and ancient dampness. This was the city's underbelly, a network of forgotten tunnels dating back to the Prohibition era, expanded by syndicates and then abandoned. Elena didn't hesitate. She clicked on a tactical flashlight attached to her vest, the beam cutting a sharp path through the gloom. "Keep your head down and watch your step," she commanded, setting a pace that made Dante's lungs burn. He was a man who spent his time in gymnasiums and boardrooms, but Elena was moving with a relentless, rhythmic power. She navigated the labyrinth of tunnels with a cartographer's precision, turning down branching paths that looked identical to Dante. "How do you know where we're going?" Dante panted, the weight of the tactical gear starting to pull at his shoulders. "I built this route 3 years ago when I was the ghost," she replied without looking back. "It leads to the old subway maintenance hub. From there, we can get anywhere in the city. But they'll have heat sensors in the vents. We need to move fast." Dante watched the way her body moved, the strength in her legs as she cleared debris, the way she checked every corner before signaling him forward. He felt a profound sense of displacement. He was the great Dante Moretti, the man who held the city in his palm. Yet here he was, trailing behind a woman he had dismissed as a fat little baker only hours ago. The guilt was a physical weight. He had insulted her, looked down on her, and yet she was the only reason he wasn't a charred corpse in that warehouse. "Elena," he started, his voice echoing off the damp walls. "Back at the gala. I didn't know." She stopped abruptly and turned around. The flashlight beam caught the side of her face, highlighting the sharp, beautiful line of her jaw and the cold intensity of her eyes. "You didn't know what, Dante? That I could kill a man with my bare hands. That I knew how to survive a tactical hit. That shouldn't have mattered. You treated me like trash because I didn't fit your aesthetic of what a useful person looks like. You saw a woman who was soft and assumed she was weak. That's your failing, not mine." She stepped closer, her presence overwhelming in the cramped space. Dante could smell the gunpowder and the faint scent of her vanilla perfume, a jarring contrast that made his heart race. "In my world," she whispered, her voice like velvet-wrapped steel, "the things you find unappealing are the things that keep you alive. My weight is muscle and endurance. My clumsiness was a mask to keep people from seeing the soldier underneath. If we get out of this, you're going to have to decide if you want a trophy or a partner. Because I don't play the role of the damsel." Dante was speechless. He reached out, his hand hovering near her arm, wanting to touch the tactical tattoos he could see peeking out from her torn sleeve, but he pulled back. "I'm learning," he said softly. "Fast." "Good," she said, her expression softening just a fraction. "Because the lesson is about to get harder." She led him to a heavy steel door reinforced with iron bars. She pulled a handheld device from her belt and plugged it into a keypad. "This is the junction. If we bypass this, we're under the financial district. But Silas knows about these tunnels. He's a rat, but he's a well-informed rat. He'll have men waiting at the exits." "Then why are we going this way?" Dante asked. Elena turned to him, a predatory glint in her eyes. "Because we're not going to the exit, Dante. We're going to the hub. The hub controls the gas lines for the entire northern sector of the city. Silas thinks he's hunting us, but we're about to turn his entire search party into a giant bonfire." She forced the door open, revealing a massive chamber filled with hissing pipes and glowing pressure gauges. But as they stepped inside, the lights hummed to life, illuminating the catwalks above. Dante's heart sank. Standing on the central platform, flanked by a dozen men with submachine guns, was a figure Dante recognized all too well. It wasn't Silas, but a man even more dangerous, Leonid Volkov, the head of the rival Bratva family. "Dante, my friend," Volkov's voice boomed, echoing through the chamber. "You always did have a taste for the finer things. I must admit, I didn't expect you to find such a formidable bodyguard. But even the ghost can't haunt a grave once it's filled with lead." Elena didn't flinch. She stepped in front of Dante, her rifle raised, her body a shield of pure defiance. She looked up at the circle of gunmen, a cold, mocking smile playing on her lips. "Leonid," she called out, her voice steady. "You're standing on a pressurized methane junction, and I have a thermite charge wired to my heartbeat. If you fire a single shot, this entire block becomes a crater. So, the question isn't whether you can kill us. The question is, are you ready to die with us?" The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the hiss of the pipes and the frantic thumping of Dante's heart. He looked at Elena's back, at the steady rise and fall of her shoulders, and realized that he wasn't just following a soldier anymore. He was following a queen. Suddenly, A red laser appeared on Elena's chest, centered right over her heart. It wasn't coming from Volkov's men on the catwalks. It was coming from the dark tunnel behind them, the way they had just come. "You're right, Elena." A new voice emerged from the shadows behind them, cold and familiar. It was Silas, Dante's consigliere. He stepped into the light, holding a sniper rifle with a specialized suppressor. The thermite is a problem, but a heart shot is instantaneous. The pulse stops, the trigger never sends the signal. And I've always been a very good shot. Dante felt the world tilt. They were trapped between two armies, with a sniper aimed at the woman who had become his entire world in the span of a single night. Elena didn't move, but Dante saw her fingers tighten on her own weapon. "Dante," she whispered, so low only he could hear. "When the steam hits, run left. Don't look back." "No," Dante whispered back, his voice thick with a sudden, fierce protectiveness. "We do this together." Silas's finger tightened on the trigger. "Goodbye, boss." It was a good run. Just as the crack of the rifle echoed through the chamber, Elena didn't run left. She lunged backward, her entire weight slamming into Dante, knocking him off the catwalk and into the churning, icy waters of the reservoir below. As they plummeted into the dark, a massive explosion rocked the chamber above, the world turning into a blinding white roar of heat and screaming metal.